And Shavuot Tov,
Shavua Tov.
coming a bit lower tonight, and a guest by my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, David and Tirza in Tel Aviv. So coming to you live from Tel Aviv, all Shavuot Tov. Okay, as we do every week, we have a story of tzaddikim, if we can, of the Baal Shem Tov. This week we have a story of the Rebbe Reb Zusha. So we know it's a famous story, but it's always good to tell the story again. So the Rebbe Reb Zusha of Anapali, who was a student of the Maggid the Mizrich. So he had a custom that he would daven every day ba'arichos, which means he would daven at length. And after he finished davening, he would go to the side room of the shul, which was kind of his place, and he would open the window, and lifting his eyes to Hashem, he would say, Master of the universe, Kodesh Baruch Hu, Zusha is hungry. That's how Zusha would speak. He would always speak about himself in the third. And that was kind of the cue with Reb Zusha's Gabbai attendant to prepare to bring in his breakfast, which he prepared, which was he would eat cakes and schnapps, which was a custom then, maybe a little herring. And that's how it went every day. And eventually, at one point, the Gabbai was feeling that this arrangement, this idea that the Reb Zusha opens the window, calls out to Hashem, Zusha's hungry, and then the attendant walks in, and it's as if Hashem is sending him his breakfast every day from, like the man from heaven, which is what we learn about this week's parsha, the man. Allah talks about the man. He says, I bring the gift, I bring the breakfast. So it's not something that comes from, so to say, as if it comes like the man from heaven. So he decided that one time he's not going to bring the breakfast. The Zusha is going to daven barichos like he does, and he's going to open the window, and he's going to say, "HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Master of the universe, Zusha is hungry. I'm not going to bring him the breakfast. Let's see what happens then." So that's what happened. One morning, the Zusha comes in, and before, his custom was that before the Zusha would daven early in the morning, it wasn't like he woke up late. He'd wake up very early, and he would go to the mikveh. And after he went to the mikveh, he would do his studies, and he would do his davening at length. At the mikveh, he would go to very early before daybreak. And it was one of the winter mornings in Anapoli. And he's walking, and it's pouring with rain. And the rain was so strong that the mud was everywhere. So what they would do in those situations when it was muddy is the people in the city would, or the Department of Transportation and roads would put planks of wood over like kind of places where the water would gather. So like this, you could walk over the wood and not have to step in the mud. So Zusha's, again, it's cold, it's rainy, it's wet. He's making his way to the mikveh. And he sees opposite a person who's also there, a guest, someone who was a guest who was also going against Reb Zusha. He sees Reb Zusha, and he looks at Reb Zusha, the way Reb Zusha was dressed. He didn't look like a rabbi. He didn't look he looked like a tramp. He had, ripped clothing, and his maybe he was missing a few teeth, and he looked like he was an opportunity to have a good time. This guest of the city, he was just traveling. So he sees Reb Zusha on the plank of wood, and he thought he's going to try to jump on the wood really hard, and this tramp is going to lose his balance. So he starts jumping on the wood very hard, and Reb Zusha is trying to hold his balance. And after a while, Reb Zusha falls into the mud. And this traveler is laughing. Oh, he's so clever. He got this tramp to fall into the mud. Reb Zusha doesn't say anything, but Reb Zusha was very humble. Zusha gets up in the mud. He makes his way to the mikveh. Cleans himself up. Obviously, he was muddy. It's kind of more complicated. And he goes back to this basic Knesset. And he goes from basic Knesset, he goes to daven. And he has this custom that he davens length, he learns. And then when he was ready for his breakfast, he opens the window and he says, "Look, Master of the universe, the Zusha is hungry." Now, if you remember this, we said that the Gabbai said that today he's not going to bring him the food. But what happened was after this visitor jumped on the board and made Reb Zusha fall into the mud, he continued on his way back to his hotel or inn. And when he came into the inn, he was still laughing to himself about what he did. And he saw the innkeeper there. And he told him, I saw this tramp. I jumped on the boards and I made him fall into the mud. He thought it was funny. The innkeeper was not laughing because he knew right away that this was Reb Zusha. So he goes, oh, Yvei, what did you do? You know what you did? The holy Rebbe Reb Zusha was the person that you threw into the mud. It's horrible, the Rebbe Reb Zusha. So now the visitor felt horrible. He caused Reb Zusha to fall into the mud. What should I do? What should I do? This is horrible. So he goes, you must plead forgiveness. I'll tell you what to do. Every day Reb Zusha opens the window and he finishes davening. And he says, Master of the Universe, Zusha's hungry. When he does that today, you're going to run into his room. I'm going to prepare you a big plate of beautiful delicacies and nice things for his breakfast. And you're going to run in and you're going to bring him his breakfast, and then you're going to beg him for forgiveness. So it happens. And back to our story, Reb Zusha comes and he calls out, Master of the Universe, Zusha's hungry. And his Gabbai refuses to bring him breakfast. All of a sudden, his Gabbai is about to start thinking, look, Zusha is going to learn that I bring him the breakfast, not Hashem. This person comes running into Reb Zusha's room, right past the Gabbai, with a big tray of food and schnapps. He puts it in front of Reb Zusha and he begs him for forgiveness. He said, I was the person, I was very wrong. I caused you to fall into the mud. And I just want to plead your forgiveness. And of course, Reb Zusha forgave him. But also the message that the Gabbai got was that everything does come from Hashem. And even when he thinks he's preparing the breakfast, Reb Zusha really, Hashem willed it so. And if it's not going to be him, it'll be someone else. And that's the story we have for this week. It's a little bit of a questionable, it's a famous story. This version, of course, is told us by Rabbi Yachmiel Tillis from Ascent. The questions we have on the story is not the authenticity of the story, but just the message of the story. It's as far as Reb Zusha is ready to go to show this person that bitachon, that everything comes from Hashem, is that even he was ready to be shamed and thrown into the mud. And this doesn't really answer the behavior of the visitor, because even if it wasn't Reb Zusha, even if it was what he thought was a tramp, a person of the street at night, you still don't throw them into the mud. That's not correct behavior. So obviously there's a lot of lessons to go around in general. But the nakud of the story, the point of the story is that Reb Zusha wanted to show his attendant. He was really ready to be he'd fallen into the mud to show that everything comes from Hashem. All right, gives us some food for thought. Let's bring up the Shulchan Aruch. We started last week the chapter 21. Chapter 21 is the laws of compensation when prayer is omitted. So what happens, what do we do when we miss out on the davening? It means we miss the davening. We forget to daven a mincha, we forget to daven a shachar, we forget to daven a musaf or a mariv. So we're holding law number 2. So he says as follows. Let's say you didn't daven, but you still have time to daven. Because you thought you had more time. So you figure like this. You're in the middle of doing something, you think you have time to daven. Once you finish doing what you will be doing, meaning, let's say you're holding at, let's say you can't have mincha past 3 o'clock, let's say 5 o'clock, and you're about to start something at 4 o'clock. Okay, I have an hour. I'll start what I'm doing now, and I'll finish before, or continue what I'm doing now, and I'll finish before, and then I will daven mincha. But as things turned out, it went past the time. It went past 5 o'clock, and you missed the time to daven mincha. So you could either be busy doing something or busy in business. They have said that you were scared that you're going to have a big loss in your business, and you had to continue doing whatever you were doing. Because of being involved in earning a living, at that moment, you missed the davening. So, even though you're not allowed to pass the time of davening, for for money. You can't just decide, oh, well, I have to continue working, so I have to miss the davening. That's not allowed. But in this case, where you got preoccupied, it wasn't like you were doing it because you just don't care about davening and you just want to get money and earn your living. But in this case, you were trying to finish before the time, and it just the time got the better of you. So here, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says you're still considered an oinus, a person who's kind of out of their control. Yesh like Tashlumin, and you still are able to fix it or to make up for it by davening 2 davenings in the next month. So whether this is a Shabbos or a mincha, so you're allowed to daven 2 times, because we learned that only you're allowed to daven 2 times if you're a shogeg, if you do it by mistake. But if you do it on purpose, you can't just daven 2 times for Nesser. So here is a case where a person didn't want to pass the time, but is preoccupied in something, and you thought you could finish it before. So even though technically it was you knew that you were kind of running a risk, but nevertheless, we'll call the Shulchan Aruch says that's called an oinus. V'cheini makris shichrus, or let's say you had too much to drink, and because of that, lo yairoi lispal, you couldn't daven. You're not allowed to daven when you're drunk. Then if that worked out that way, like Aaron asked, I think, about what happens on Rosh on Simchas Torah and Tam Purim, etc. So nechshav ka'oinus, you considered like a oinus, even though you shouldn't have been drinking. Because you should have stopped drinking when it was time to daven. But here you continued drinking, and because of that, you came too drunk. So then it means basically what this law is telling us is that we're not so strict about what's considered a shoygig and what's considered a mazid, what's considered an oinus, what's considered willingly or out of your control or by mistake. We try to be a little bit more lenient. That's the bottom line. Let's see the footnotes on this. So I think we're footnote number 3 only. Yes. Because even a revius of alcohol disallows prayer until the effects have dissipated. So it means a person, here the footnote saying it's not just you have to be totally drunk, but even if you drink a little bit, a revius is not a lot. A revius is even if you had to, a little bit of a l'chaim is also, so you shouldn't be davening after that. Okay. Let's continue. Ein tashlumim litfila ela betfila hasmuchala. Okay, this is another rule. Let's say you missed out a davening. You missed out Ma'ariv. So when could you make up for Ma'ariv? Only the next morning Shabbos. But let's say you forget. You don't do Ma'ariv, and either you forget to do 2 times in Shabbos, or you forget Shabbos even. Ein la'oi tashlumim. You can't make up for it a second time. Keep going. Gives an example. For whatever reason, willingly or not, if you did it willingly, of course you can't make up. But let's say you didn't daven by mistake. You were an oinus. So you didn't daven not Shabbos, and then you didn't daven mincha. So then only mincha you could do twice. You can't do that. You can't make up for lacking, for not davening the morning prayer, the Shabbos. The Ma'ariv afterwards. So the Ma'ariv after the Shabbos and mincha, you could only do 2 times for the mincha, but not for the Shabbos. Al Shabbos ein l'tashlumin, there's no time, you can't make up for the morning prayer. Why? Because you missed both Shabbos and mincha. You didn't daven Shabbos in this time, and you didn't daven Shabbos in the second opportunity you could have had, even if you're an oinus. It's not a question about if it's your fault or not. You only have 1 prayer to make up for the previous prayer. Let's see the footnote number 4. Footnote number 4 is, allowing 2 periods of prayer to pass without praying is considered negligent. Okay, so here he gives a definition of it. He says that there's very rare a time, although it's possible to be a time, but let's say there's very rare a time where you can't figure out within 2 times of prayer to daven. And if you didn't, then it's a level of negligence, like amazed, and therefore they don't give you opportunity to make up for the first prayer. Thus, you no longer have the privilege of compensating the omitted tefillah. Now, the question obviously is, what happens if it's a serious oinus? I don't know, someone was knocked out. And there's a lot of things that could happen. That is an oinus that could last more than shachris and mincha. So he doesn't go into the details of what would be in such a situation. Yes, Aaron.
What if you're with your wife in the hospital, she's pregnant, so you're going to give birth, but you miss because you're waiting, because at any moment it could happen, but it doesn't happen 2 prayers worth of waiting.
That's again, that's a very good question. There's many other scenarios. You yourself could be sick in bed, right? So let's say you were sick, or you were being operated on. I don't know. There could be many things that could take longer than 2 tefillas, 2 prayers. It could take longer than 3 prayers. So the foot in the actual text, it doesn't say the reason is because it's negligence. It just says the reason is that you can't make up twice. In the footnote, he adds the reason is negligence. So that gives us a little bit of a problem, because in the case, if you're calling it negligence, it isn't always negligence. To say that it's negligence is sometimes it's possible. It's in the case of working, you could say it's possible, but there are scenarios where it is out of your control. So it's a good question. I have to check on that. Yes, Rebecca.
Actually, that I think what you're about to say was going to be my question. I wanted to know what happens if you want to say like Hallel and Musaf on a Rosh Chodesh and you miss it that morning, but it sounds like maybe that's what you're going to talk about.
Yes. We're going to Musaf right now.
Okay.
But let's say Rosh Chodesh, right? Rosh Chodesh has Musaf. Im lo yispal shachris, you didn't daven shachris. Yechel hashlim yachim mincha. Then, so first we're talking about the shachris. So you didn't daven shachris, you didn't daven musaf, and now it's mincha time. Could you daven shachris, or do we say that you pass 2 prayers? Why? So he says in the parentheses, because musaf in theory could be, in a worst case scenario, you could daven it until the night, because that's the time of the sacrifice of the musaf. So it's not considered you passed 2 times, because you did shachris, you missed musaf and shachris, but musaf you could always daven later. So it wasn't like you passed the time of musaf, and therefore you could daven in mincha 2 times for the shachris. Well, achet tefillas musaf en yechel hashlim tefillas shachris. Hold on a second. But in the case of, after the Musaf prayer, if you davened already Musaf, any yochel hashlim tefillas shachris, then you can't make up for the shachris. If you forget to make it up when you daven Musaf, because then you already did the Musaf. Hold on, Aaron, let's finish the law. The kivin shemaskava kar Musaf, you already mentioned Musaf, and you already should tell the tefillas shachris. You shouldn't do the shachris, which is the morning sacrifice, corresponding to the morning sacrifice. So if you forget shachris, you daven musaf, and now you remembered that you didn't daven shachris by mincha, you can't mention shachris because you already did musaf. But if it didn't pass the time of the morning, you davened musaf, but it didn't pass the time of the morning prayer, you could daven shachris again, even though you forgot musaf. So just to correct myself, this case is talking about even if you're not holding mincha. If you daven musaf, you forget to daven shachris, which basically means, based on what Rebecca asked, definitely if you're holding away from the minyan, don't daven musaf with the minyan. Daven shachris by yourself first, because davening musaf with the minyan makes it complicated, because you shouldn't be davening shachris after musaf. Only says that if you do it when there's still time for shachris, then you could daven shachris after musaf. But traditionally, we always do musaf before shachris. Yes, Aaron.
Okay, so if it's your time, you have to say the prayers because someone died, so you have 11 months to say the prayers for the dead, and you decide that I'm just using this as a scenario. So you decide you're gonna wait for the minion, and you say, I'll just learn until we get a minion, and then one prayer lapses, and then a second prayer lapses. Should you have just prayed by yourself and forget about those prayers, or you should wait?
Yeah. Yes. If it comes to the time where there's no where it's about to lapse. You have to wait for the you have to wait for the you should daven even in the first prayer. Let's say davening shachris or mincha. The mincha is more likely. You davening mincha and there's no minyan. As it's getting close to the end of mincha, you should daven mincha. And then let's say you wait for Ma'ariv and there's still no minyan, you should daven Ma'ariv. You shouldn't continue. You shouldn't try to wait so you could do two chakras. No,
So then what happens to the prayer you're supposed to say for the dead? Do they lose out?
you try the best you can. Some people have a backup plan. Some people do. I have a friend who's lost his mother recently. So, and we lost a friend of our classes, Paul Azus. So I know that he doesn't have a son who could say Kaddish for him. His son is under the age. So there's people you could hire that they always say Kaddish for your loved ones. You pay them like whatever. So you have $500 or $700 a year, and they'll say Kaddish. And even though you're saying Kaddish, you have a backup plan. So you could you could create a backup plan, but if you don't have a backup plan, you have to have it. If you shouldn't wait. So many. Okay. Yes, Rebecca.
So I didn't really understand from what you said, like what does that mean for like a woman who isn't davening with a minyan and just like didn't have time to daven Shachris, Hallel, Musaf, and it's like the afternoon when like it's not dark yet. So like what is she supposed to do?
No, then you do Shachris Musaf. But if the question over here is if you did Musaf first, and now so that if you did Musaf first and now it's time for Mincha, you can't do Shachris again. But if you did but it means if he said you could if you do Shachris, if you forget Shachris, you can always make up Shachris and Mincha because Mincha's end and Musaf's end pretty much end the same time. But if you daven Musaf first, you can't make up for Shachris unless now you could still daven Shachris. But so basically, if let's say you're holding a regular time, it's 4 o'clock on the summer, and you haven't daven Shachris or Musaf yet, so then you would daven Shachris first, Musaf, then Mincha. But if it's already
Wait, sorry. You daven Shachris, then Musaf, then
yes,
Mincha.
always Musaf after Shachris. And
Right, okay.
let's say you come to shul on Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, I don't know, and they're holding Musaf. It's not so simple for you to daven Musaf first and then daven
Right.
Shachris by yourself. Because if you daven Musaf with the minyan, Shachris should always be before Musaf. Musaf is the extra carbon that's done after the Shachris. He's saying that if you daven Shachris, Musaf first, but it's not finished the time of Shachris. Let's say the end of Shachris, the end. It's you come into shul, it's 11 o'clock, and the davening Musaf on Shabbos. It's not just Rosh Chodesh, you have Musaf on Shabbos. So they're holding Musaf. So then if you daven Musaf with the minyan, you could daven Shachris afterwards because it's still the time of Shachris. The only time you can't daven Shachris after Musaf if it's past the time of Shachris. If you daven Musaf. If you didn't daven Musaf, then you could daven Shachris, then Musaf. But it seems like even in such a case, better first to daven Shachris, then Musaf.
So, but let's say I'm home, I'm not with a minyan, I'm home and it's like 4 o'clock.
Always
So
Shachris first. Shachris first.
Shachris, Hallel, Musaf, and then
Yes.
Mincha?
Yes.
Okay.
The,
And are you allowed to say Shema? Can I say Shema like in the afternoon?
the mitzvah of the Shema is till it's man midiraisa. And if you miss it midiraisa, like we said before, then you can say Shema as a part of Torah. But you're missing out the mitzvah of Shema of the diraisa of the morning of saying Shema.
But women are like have to daven. Like I thought we could for sure say it till chatzos, but I was just
Okay.
wondering about after that.
You could say it. Everyone could say Shema if you missed it. It doesn't mean you shouldn't say Shema because you missed it. You should say Shema. You say Shema when you can, but you missed the idea of saying Shema in its proper time.
So women are also bound by that, even though it's like a time-bound mitzvah.
The mitzvah is the town. The mitzvah is in that time. If you want to do the mitzvah at all, do it in its time.
Oh, got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yes, Aaron.
Okay, I heard something with if you miss prayers, you can say Shmoneh Esrei twice. I may be wrong.
Yes,
How
that's
does
what
that
we're
work?
talking about. This is what we're talking about. This is the laws we're learning now.
So explain the Shmoneh Esrei twice.
Okay, we're going to get to how we do it. But basically, we're not holding it yet. But basically, if you miss, let's say Myra, you do 2 times Shabbos. Which one is the first one? Which one is the first one? Which is the second one? We'll get into that. So we didn't get to that yet. First, we're getting
Okay.
to the technicalities. So just to recap, law number 4, you could, if you've already davened Musaf, so, and it's past the time of Shacharis, you can't daven 2 times Shacharis by Mincha, because Musaf, you pass the time of Shacharis and you daven Musaf, so kind of cut off that it's 2 prayers. If you daven Musaf and it's still time for you to daven Shacharis, but you just didn't daven the order properly, so you can daven Shacharis after Musaf itself, although it's not proper to do it that way. And but if it passes the time, then you shouldn't. Also, if you didn't daven Musaf at all, then it's obviously then you daven Shacharis first. Okay, let's see the footnotes. Okay, footnote number 5. Musaf, an additional tefillah corresponding to the special sacrifices that were brought on festival days, in other words, Shabbos, Kodesh, Yom Tov. So that's what the Musaf means. It means it's the Musaf. This word is rooted in the word lahosif, to add. It's the added sacrifices that we did on a holiday. Okay. 6 is, despite having already prayed 2 tefillas Musaf and Mincha. So he says that if you omitted Shacharis unintentionally, you may compensate for it after the Mincha prayer, because the period of Musaf extends. So if you, despite having already prayed 2 tefillas Musaf and Mincha, because the period of Musaf extends to the. Hold on, but I think this footnote's a mistake. Now, let's get back to this footnote in a second. 7 is that if the period for the mincha, 2 periods of tefillas have not passed, although 2 tefillas have actually taken place, since Shacharis, nevertheless, only 1 period of prayer has passed, since the time allotted for Musaf and Mincha are identical from midday until nightfall. Okay. 8 is that it is because having already mentioned the Musaf sacrifice, it is inappropriate to make up for the Shacharis prayer, since as mentioned in the preface of this chapter, 2 Musaf Shemon Esrei would require the compensating Shemon Esrei with the focal points on the special additional sacrifice. It's not fitting to compensate it for Shacharis. Okay, so the problem is to daven 2 musafs for Shacharis. That's not something appropriate. Why? Because the musaf is a different prayer, totally different prayer, which I think we talked about in the beginning of this chapter. In the preface, it said that. Let's just go back. Due to this, a number of unique situations arise. In other words, emitting mincha on a Friday afternoon requires 2 Ma'ariv Shemon Esrei for Friday night, both being on Shabbos Eve Shemon Esrei. The chapter discusses, okay. So again, we discussed what happens over here. You can be davening 2 Shacharises, you can be davening in 2 musafs. So it's better if you still have time, because you could daven mincha at the same time as musafs, then you daven the musaf, the mincha twice, not you would do the mincha twice, not the musaf twice, because to make up for the shacharis. But if you could still daven shacharis, then you daven the shacharis after the musaf, if there's still time to daven shacharis. Okay. This thought was a little bit twisted in the mind twister, but we'll have to hopefully have it clear. So let's just do a summary of this law. That if it's a day of musaf and you didn't do shacharis, you could do the shacharis after mincha, not with mincha, not after the musaf, because mincha and musaf at the same time, so you didn't pass 2 prayers. And he's saying what he means that this over here, you can't do 2 musafs for shacharis because they're 2 different types of prayers. But he does say if you didn't. If there's still time for shacharis after the musaf, then you could daven shacharis on its own, even though you didn't daven mincha yet. Okay, that's the bottom line to this law. Any questions before we close up? All right, wonderful. We'll continue and we'll answer. We'll get to your questions, Aaron, next week, where we discuss exactly how we do it when it comes to doing 2 ma'ariv, 2 minchas, 2 shacharis, especially if the mincha was weekday and the ma'ariv was Shabbos. The difference is, I just want to give again, the difference is that the musaf, when you have an opportunity to do musaf or mincha twice, do two musafs. Let's say you didn't daven shachris, so you could do either two musafs or two minchas. So we do two minchas, not two musafs, even though the next prayer is musaf, because they both really finish at the same time. And it's better to do the prayer of mincha twice because that's similar to the chakras than to do the prayer of musaf twice, where the musaf talks about things that has nothing to do with the chakras. But then again, if you've done the musaf first and there's still time for chakras, then you do the chakras right after on its own without having to do twice mincha. But if you pass the time of chakras, then you do 2 times mincha, not 2 times musaf. That's because you have a choice. It's better to go 2 times mincha than to do 2 times musaf. All right, everyone. Laila Tov, have a wonderful. Shavuot Tov, have a wonderful